On the side of my father, they were very gentle people, very quiet people. My grandmother, Celestine was her name. Grand-mère Celestine, we call her. And she was very strict but gentle, going to church on Sunday, you know, I mean, very religious. My grandfather was very quiet man, you know, and I still remember when I was going to visit him, he was taking me on his knee and asking me questions, and he was a heavy smoker. He was rolling his old cigarette, and I still can remember the smell, you know, the tobacco smell around. He had a mustache. Every time I was going to see him, he was always making a point to sit next to me and ask me questions. And he was very, very gentle, very quiet man, very, very level. And on my mother's side, they were more family. Well, that was because we were living closer and on the side of my mother. And there was a lot of Sunday meal together with my grandmother and my grandfather. And they were going there in the morning, and the women were cooking, and my father was always shaving my grandfather. I think my grandfather was shaving once a week, and my father was doing that. And while they were shaving, while he was shaving my grandfather, and they were opening a bottle of wine, and they were talking. And going there on Sunday was a full day for. The meal was being prepared and we were eating late.
Grand-père et grand-mère Guérin, c'est-à-dire mon père et ma mère.
C'est ça.
Ils ont vécu ensemble 56 ans. La première, elle s'appelait Louise, elle est décédée à 2 ans et demi d'une maladie d'enfant du temps, en groupe ou coqueluche ou diphtérie. Et puis ensuite, il y a eu le deuxième, qui a vécu jusqu'à l'âge de 28 ans, il s'est fait tuer, il est allé s'établir dans l'Ouest canadien, chez le frère de maman, pour s'établir là-bas. Et malheureusement, au moment qu'il avait acquis à peu près ce qu'il le désirait, il s'est fait tuer par la foudre. Et ensuite, Madame Lahaye, la mère de Lorette, étant la troisième. Le mari, c'est M. Lahaye, qui était plombeur, ferblantier dans le temps, et qui était capable de la faire vivre. Et eux autres ont eu 5 enfants, c'est-à-dire 8 enfants, 5 ont vécu, et 3 qui sont décédés en bas âge. Après ça, Louis, mon frère, qui était charpentier, menuisier, charpentier, et qui a épousé une demoiselle Couture dont il a eu 5 enfants. Il y a eu aussi Mme Carbonneau, le suivant Rose, qui s'est mariée à un marin, qui ont eu une belle famille aussi. Et ensuite Eugène, qui était celui qui a adopté, chez qui Lorette a été élevée. Il était marié à une demoiselle Brunel, Jeanne. Ils ont été plusieurs années ensemble. Quoique quand il s'est marié, c'était supposé une personne très délicate de santé, mais ils ont vécu des années ensemble. Et Lorette, c'est là qu'elle a eu l'avantage d'être dans un milieu où elle était adorée, elle était aimée. Après Jeanne, c'était Mme Rancourt, qui à son tour, Blanche. Blanche et moi, on était les 2 petites. Ça a été longtemps, on était les 2 petites. Et puis, elle, Mme Rancourt, a eu une famille de 7 enfants, elle aussi, et qui ont sorti, c'est bien, malheureusement, là, ça part. Mais, moi, je reste là, mais les jeunes s'en vont. Il y en a déjà des parties chez les jeunes. Et il reste moi, célibataire, qui a été 96 ans. Je suis née en 98, le 5 octobre. En décembre 1918, 2 mois à peu près après la guerre, après la signature de la guerre. Lorette avait 9 mois, elle était née de février.
Le 20 février.
Et puis, quand Lorette, quand Jeanne d'Arc et Lorette sont venues au monde à Montréal, c'était très difficile pour le temps que la femme elle couchait à la maison. Moi, je suis montée à Montréal pour aider ma sœur, Madame Lahaye, là, à la naissance de Jeanne d'Arc et à la naissance de Lorette.
À 3 ans, j'ai perdu ma mère. Puis, elle était à Montréal. On l'a transportée chez ma grand-mère à Bienville. Puis, là, je me souviens qu'on mettait des cierges. Ça m'avait frappé. J'avais 3 ans. Puis, il y avait des exposés dans le salon. Puis, il avait baissé les toiles, il faisait noir comme sur le jaune. Oui. Après ça, là, je me rappelle, là, mon père s'est remarié. J'ai resté une quinzaine d'années avec ma belle-mère. Puis là, ça ne marchait pas tellement. Ça fait que mon père m'a dit « Retourne chez ta grand-mère ». Puis là, ben, les choses sont bien arrangées parce que les autres, ils commençaient à avoir de l'âge. Et puis, ça lui prenait quelqu'un pour rester avec eux autres. Quand ils sont décédés, un an après, j'ai été restée chez mon oncle Eugène avec Laurette 1 an. Puis un an après qu'ils ont été décédés, je me suis mariée. Puis là, j'ai resté dans la rue Saint-Antoine, pas tellement loin de chez mon oncle Eugène.
Louise Guérin, qui était la mère de Lorette. Oui, la mère de Jeanne d'Arc. C'est-à-dire, elle est décédée en 1918. Elle avait 32 ans. Elle laissait 5 petits-enfants. Excusez.
C'est pas grave.
Le plus vieux avait 10 ans à peu près. Alors, les enfants ont été un peu divisés. Le plus vieux est allé chez le grand-père Lahaye, le père de son père. Et puis, les deux des garçons sont allés dans une institution d'orphelins, à l'hospice Monseigneur Gay à Lauson. Et puis, Jeanne d'Arc est restée chez nous jusqu'au moment où son père s'est remarié, 1 an après. Puis Lorette a été, on ne peut pas dire adoptée, mais Eugène a demandé à Alexandre, son père, s'il voulait que Lorette reste chez eux définitivement, que si lui refaisait sa vie, qu'il voulait bien que Lorette reste. Il dit, un enfant ne se donne pas, mais il dit, je ne voudrais pas que tu me la retires quelques années après. Alors, elle a continué d'être très heureuse chez Eugène, avec Jeanne et qui ont été pour elle des parents. Elle a eu un bon cours d'instruction, puis après ça, elle s'est mise à travailler. Elle était heureuse aussi. Elle a eu une très belle enfance.
Ma tante Jeanne, un jour, avait décoré sa table. Ça fait qu'elle s'en va dans un champ, puis elle ramasse plein de belles fleurs avec de la vigne, puis elle en a mis tout le tour de la table. Elle avait mis ça pour brasser avec ma tante Thérèse. Toujours que le lendemain, les rougeurs ont commencé à sortir. Vous n'avez pas vu? Moi, je ne verrai jamais d'autres choses comme ça. Jamais, jamais. La tête, à la largeur des épaules. Les oreilles, ça avait 4 pouces. Les yeux, une petite ligne, puis un petit trou à travers la ligne. Oh. Épeurant, des robes de nuit d'hôpital. C'était sans bon sens, les mains enveloppées. Oh, on les regardait, on n'aurait jamais pensé que ça pouvait revenir.
People were poor, okay? They were poor naturally, but they knew. And then when you go to school, you learn by history the French Revolution. And that's stick in our mind because this was the emancipation of the people. People started to be educated, think for themselves, wanted a better way of life, which is normal still them today, you know, I mean. And the extremist of that was the communist. And due to what happened in Russia, they thought some people, what I would call the activists, they were very popular because they could point out, to poor people how they were living and all that. The peak time in France for that was 35, 36, 37. I remember like 14th of July, or even on Sunday, they had dancing in a street, or during the summer, and every other piece of music was the International. C'est la lutte finale. Oh yeah, mon oncle André was a diehard communist. His father was a diehard communist, and but I'm sure that if he would still be living today, he would defend Stalin. He wouldn't believe that Stalin killed 25 million people. He would say, no, it's not possible. As an uncle, he was a regular uncle, but he was very active. Yeah, he was something in a communist. He was I think a chief of, they call that cells. They got in every area of a city or village, they got a guy who is in charge of that. And they call that a cell. And I think he was in charge of a cell. I was thinking airplane, eating airplane. That was all my thinking was about airplane for as long as I can remember. I remember my mother was always telling me one day, and I think I was, according to what I heard, about 3 years old, and I went to an air show with a neighbor, a neighbor, and my father and my mother, of course. And I threw a fit because I wanted to ride an airplane. There was what they call air baptism, or whatever. It was the first time you go in an airplane, and it was so much. And I threw a fit. I was, until I came back home. I had to cry all the time because my mother didn't want me to go on an airplane, but and then naturally I was always interested in airplane. But at the time there was not too many airplanes. It's not like today, but when I could hear an airplane, I was coming out of the door and look at that airplane until I couldn't see it. Well, he said there is a big fair. He said, and there is, everybody exposes his own airplane that they build at the club, and they had even an airplane there. I still remember a red airplane. And the guy introduced me to what they call a RAO club, and then, but I didn't belong right away. I think I was still young at the time to really go by myself. But 2-3 years later, then I belonged to the club, And then I built model airplane. I went with my father shopping downtown, and he bought me a kit, So I had to cut that, and I cut the balsam, It was all traced, and I assembled that. I did a pretty good job. I surprised even myself, I half read the instruction because I was so eager to assemble that. Then after that, I bought some other, and then I grew up in that, and then I built some big one. In fact, I even designed my own, my father, I think, was taking of my grandfather. He was a very quiet man, but my mother was the one who thinks she was running the show, all the time. France was occupied for 4 years before we were liberated again by the American and the English and the Free French. German at the time, they had so many airplanes that they were bombing here and there and created panic, and the invasion, they broke through a place which was not fortified on the border, and they invaded so fast that even the troop could not retreat, and there was not. They were just free to flow in France. There was no battle actually. And then, of course, by the end of the war, when I was in a resistance, when they had a big flow of airplane going back and forth, in the morning you were going to your guy to see if they pick up some airmen. American airmen, because some of them were lucky enough to eject, you know. And sometimes say, yeah, there is a guy, you know, in such a place, you know. So you had to go and see what was needed, see, to hide him, and then channel him to the underground, you know, through the underground, to going to Switzerland or going to some place. In central France, there is a lot of mountain, a lot of wood, and they had what they call the maquis. Was the German couldn't go in there unless they would go by million, you know. So the resistance was in there, and when they had airmen like that, they were taking them there because they were kind of, you know, sometimes they could pick them up, but some of them really finished the war right in what you call the maquis, you know, in France. Some of them, they could pick them up by airplane. Some of them, they put them and went to Spain. They had a channel going to Spain, but they were very careful because Spain was allied with the German, you know. During the night, the English were going to Germany, to whatever. But during the day, the American were flying, yeah. I was kind of a channel in what they call the resistance, and to liberate France when at the time we knew that the American came to war and all that, and we knew that one day we would be liberated, and they organized the resistance. So I joined the resistance, and what we did actually, the biggest thing that we did was escort Allied flyer who parachuted in France, try to get them out of the German hand, and sabotaging railroad. And in fact, at the end, just a few months before the liberation, what we call the liberation, the Allied came back. It was pretty nasty because the German knew that 90% of the French people were against them. You know, there was no love. You know, there was no love. Eloi, the guy across the street, the guy who became a communist after the war, after the liberation, he called me and said, "Hey, Robert," he said, "they have landed." And boy, we got a radio, you know, because we had a radio coming from England. All of a sudden said, "Here are our information," you know. And to that noise, you know, I remember the noise was ding-a-ding, 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 ding-a-ding. You get say, our force have landed today. Oh, they got landed, you know, again in the street, you know, and they say, yeah, they are landed, you know. But it took, when they landed, it took about 3 months before we were liberated, see. They landed in Normandy, they went to Paris, and then they come up north, and they pushed to Belgium. So, yeah, they landed in June the 6th, and I think we were liberated at the end of August. He had a beautiful garden, beautiful vegetable. I mean, that was his life, you know. That was his life. And he had a garden. It was maybe 500 yards, no, not even, 250 yards behind the house. And he was going there, spending a lot of time there. He built a little cabin, you know, and even he was going to nap in there in the afternoon. So sometime it was lunchtime or supper time, and my mother was going to the second floor on the window. She was looking for him, and of course, sometime he was behind some plants, you know, working on his knee, and she was calling, "George!" And George probably hear my mother, you know, because I know that by now, you know. But he didn't answer my mother, you know. He just wanted to be quiet, you know. For him, it was not time yet, you know. "George!" gosh. And after a while, he was answering, but he was coming back. So when my mother was telling me, she said, boy, I think your father is getting deaf, He never answers when I talk to him, when I call him, oh, he's getting deaf. Then my father had a kind of a half smile, and I knew, he didn't want to get bothered, But they had until they always knew, I always told them that I wanted to enlist and go in the Air Force, And it come the time that, I was 18, I was, I think, a month before 18 years old, something like that. And I wanted to go, And the time came that I went to get those papers, But since I was 18, they had to be signed by my father, So I had those papers for 2-3 days, but nothing was happening, So one day after supper, I bring those papers again, and I told my father, I said, sign those papers, and I'd like to go, And my mother started. My father said, "Well," he said, "Are you sure that that's what you want?" He said, So I said, "Oh yeah." So we had a exchange of conversation, and my father said, "Okay," he said, "Give me those papers." He said, "I'll sign that." Then my mother started, "Well, why you cry? He's going to get killed, yeah. And then all of a sudden, my father, I still remember that, he took his feet and he put his feet on a table, and all the dish jump, And he said a thing like in American traduction, say, "God damn it," he said, "if he wants to go, he wants to go." He said, I wanted to go, I couldn't go." He said, "I'm not going to stop it." And my mother froze. And he signed the papers. So I graduated, and then they were making a new school of to train a pilot coming from single engine to multi-engine. So I was on a training for the on a group training those pilots, for that. Then I was almost shipped to Indochina at the time. They had Vietnam. The French were caught in Vietnam. I just finished my 5 years of French Air Force, which was actually the best time of my life, actually, because I was always with young people, and you had that was something. It was something I could say it was one of the best time of my life. While we were in the Air Force, we had pen pals, okay, and one of the I had one. Everybody had a pen pal, and some who were very good in English, they had pen pal in the U.S., in England, all over, exchange information. I had pen pal in Canada. I don't know how I got that anyway. I don't remember how I got that, but anyway. And one day, her cousin, she came to France, who was your mother, So I went to meet her in Paris, and I took her around, and I showed her the thing that the tourists don't see. I was at the end of my French Air Force at the time. And then after I talked to your mother, so she kind of channeled me to the immigration. So I went to get papers. By knowing your mother, who was not, at the time she was just a friend, she introduced me to some people working in the the Canadian embassy in Paris. So it was kind of easier to get to go to Canada, by being introduced like that. So they give me the paper, I fill the paper, hey, they give me my paper to go. things didn't look too good in Europe, you know. And then the spirit of adventure, you know, going to Canada, you know. And by the time, Canada was never a place that I wanted to go. But then, by meeting your mother after that, then I was reading a lot about Canada. You know, I say, hey, boy, that's a nice country, you know. I had to take a big boat. I had to take the France, which was the biggest boat. I had to pay more to get, otherwise, you know, you had to wait for a year or 2 years before you could get transportation. So the last night, there is a big power. You know, I mean, you know, you dance, you know, you drink. So I maybe drink a little bit too much, you know, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, wake up. You come back, you're arriving in New York, you know, you have to get ready. Boy, you get up and, you know, you get the headache and all that, and you go outside, boy, which is good, you know, because it's winter, it's cool, you know, and you see all those big, you enter the New York harbor, and this is impressive, especially at the time, you know, coming from Europe. I mean, you see all those lights, those buildings. I mean, it's like, and I got that big headache, you know. I can hardly hit my, and I look at that. I mean, that was impressive, you know. In New York, I took a train to Canada. Now I got to Canada, I think it was the beginning of March 2nd, something like that. And I heard about the snow in Canada and, you know, the Canadian winter, you know, but I never realized that. So I got in New York, and it was sunny, but it was cool, you know, but it was, I mean, not bad, you know. So I spent 24 hours there, just time to have a sleep, you know, and walk around a little bit, and then go back in the station. So the train was leaving at midnight. And so midnight, and about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, you cross the border, or 8 o'clock in the morning. You cross the border to go to Montreal. And of course the train stops, and all the immigration people come, you know, and check you, you know. So I fell asleep. You know, I had a bed, you know. I fell asleep. So they wake us up, immigration, whatever, you know. I couldn't believe my eye. There was a wall of snow. I said, son of a God, you know. Then, that was a surprise, you know. Then the train was going slow, you know, going slow. Then it come in the station. I could see snow all over the place. I just couldn't believe. I never seen that much snow in my life, you know. Then I got to Quebec, and your mother and her uncle was there waiting for me. Then they asked me to stay at their home for a few days, you know, which was a good thing because, boy, I didn't have much money, you know. So he said, well, he said, just stay here a few days. And then I went to look for work, you know.
Ça a été une maison chaleureuse pour tout le monde qui venait ici. Tous les gens appréciaient beaucoup l'accueil que ma tante Jeanne et mon mari donnaient à tout le monde. Avec Roland, hein, ton oncle, lui, il était comique. Hein.
Ouais.
Lui, je te dis que ma tante Jeanne avait du plaisir avec. Hein.
Ah ouais?
Toute une bonne fois, il dit à ma tante Jeanne, faut que je vous montre de quoi, ma tante. Elle dit, qu'est-ce que tu me montres là? Il ôte ses pantalons, puis toutes ses shorts remplis de poses de comment faire l'amour. Hein? Ma tante Jeanne était là, arrête, montre pas ça. Ben, sérieux, lui, hein? Il dit, ma tante, faut que je vous montre de quoi? Elle dit, qu'est-ce que tu me montres? Il baisse ses culottes, puis il me montre tout ça. Hey, elle avait du plaisir avec. Hein? On avait un chalet aussi à Saint-Lambert, à peu près 25 km d'ici. Puis il y avait un grand verger. Beaucoup de pommiers, de pruniers, des bleuets, des framboises. La pêche à l'Ochigan. La rivière passait pas loin, il allait toujours prendre des poissons. Il allait chercher, en arrivant au chalet, là, il allait chercher les bleuets ou les framboises pour faire les puddings tout de suite pour le souper, pour le dîner. De ma tante Jeanne, qui faisait toutes les pâtisseries à la maison, elle organisait des grandes fêtes, elle était très organisatrice. passait pas de fête, un anniversaire, sans que c'était des grandes réceptions ici. Ton oncle, il était entrepreneur peintre. Puis, on avait un magasin en même temps, que lui, il vendait le papier, la peinture, etc. C'était tout ça, ce qu'il avait besoin. Il y a eu des années qu'il y avait plusieurs employés. Il y était des années, il y avait 19 employés. Puis il était dans les chevaliers. Il était 18 ans député de district, dans les chevaliers de Colomb. Puis après ça, il a été président de la Saint-Vincent-de-Paul, 40 ans.
The only people that I knew at the beginning were, of course, your mother, you know, and her uncle and aunt, who really were nice to me. See, that was my contact there. Really, my contact. You know, they became really my friend. You know, and then I was visiting quite often, and then from one thing to another, then I was very close to your mother, and we got married.
Laurette avait connu, elle avait connu un correspondant de Jeanne d'Arc Boulienne. Là, ben, vu qu'il y avait une commission de Jeanne d'Arc, ben, il avait rencontré Laurette et puis ils avaient été souper ensemble. Puis après ça, ben, là, l'histoire se continue. Elle s'est revenue au Canada, puis lui a resté chez ses parents. Et puis là, ben, mon oncle Jeanne a pris la responsabilité de le prendre en pension, responsable de sa venue ici, là, comme étranger. Et puis là, ben, il s'est trouvé de l'ouvrage et puis ils se sont mariés. Le jour, oui, il faisait froid. Et puis la belle France s'était collée la langue sur du fer, puis elle restait pris là. Ils ont eu de la misère à la déprendre. Oui. Puis là, ben, ils ont été en voyage de noces, puis c'est ça. Là, après ça, ils ont pris un petit logement à côté de l'hôpital Saint-Sacrement. Puis ils ont resté quelque temps à Québec. Chantal est née à Québec. Et puis après ça, ils sont en allés aux États-Unis parce que ton père trouvait que... Robert trouvait qu'ici, il n'y avait pas beaucoup d'avancement dans son métier, dans ce qu'il connaissait. Puis aux États-Unis, bien, il y avait plusieurs manufactures, des usines pour faire des voitures.
And then I launched it, and the thing goes, you know, and boy, it fly, you know, and it turned around. And in that field, there was one post. Just one post. I mean, there was a field. And the son of a gun, it goes right to that post. I just couldn't believe it, you know. In fact, I didn't even see that pole. It would whack. That was the piece that I got my father. I said, you should have told me about that, you know. I just couldn't believe it that happened, you know, when something, one pole out of no place, you know. Yeah. So I come back home and I had to glue the plane again.
Je sais pas pourquoi j'ai descendu. Les pieds m'ont glissé. Je me suis trouvée salée. Mes pantalons blancs. Ça se trouvait la descente de toilette.
Ils étaient un petit peu sales.
Oh! Et il fait
Ça a glissé longtemps.
assez longtemps pour les salir.
Allez chercher des fleurs pour Richard.
T'étais là?
Oui.
C'est maintenant.
Ah oui, je vois la lumière rouge, là. Oui.
Non, mais.
On va juste rire. Ça n'a pas de bon sens, toi.
Bon, OK.
T'as toute ta semaine devant moi.
J'ai besoin de sortir, hein?